I think persistence is key. You have to be persistent in this industry and professional. And remember that your reputation is the most valuable thing that you have, especially in Washington, D.C. And I've seen people who've gotten into controversies but have treated people nicely. And then I've seen people who've gotten into controversies who've not treated people nicely, and they don't survive those controversies. So I do think that as far as persistence is good, making contacts, having a coffee, setting up a coffee. And I even tell aspiring journalists to interview journalists to say, how did you succeed? People love talking about themselves. So that's something to think about.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Bob Cusack. Bob is the editor-in-chief at The Hill, a top U.S. political publication read by the White House and more lawmakers than any other news source. Here are 3 things I think you should know about Bob before we dive in. Number 1, he's covered politics in Washington since 1995, first for Inside Washington Publishers and then for The Hill. We're going to hear a great story about how Bob got his start, which I'm excited for you to hear. Number 2, Bob is one of those political insiders people across the United States and the world see on TV. He appears more than 100 times a year on cable news networks and moderates dozens of policy and political discussions each year that are not even broadcast. He's won numerous awards for his work from the National Press Club and the Society of Professional Journalists. And number 3, something you may not know, is that Bob is a Screen Actors Guild member who's appeared in HBO's Veep, one of Washington's favorite comedies, and who has written 2 award-winning screenplays. Bob, you have been called many things, from reporter to editor-in-chief, a news leader by the Harvard Kennedy School, and even an award-winning screenplay writer. Today, we are thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thanks, Anthony, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited to dive in, and obviously this is very timely. We had an election recently. You've been covering politics in Washington for nearly 30 years, before social media, before smartphones. So I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about how influence in Washington has changed.
Well, it's changed dramatically, especially with the internet and social media. It was more of an inside game in the 1990s, where it was all about shoe leather, going to Capitol Hill, influence people like that. Now you're seeing podcasts. You're seeing whether it's Joe Rogan or Elon Musk. I mean, they are playing a huge role in pushing policymakers on social media, and it's striking. And you're seeing people protest at different events. I mean, to make their point, whatever that point is. And it's just so much more intertwined. And now the influence business, just like the news business, we just used to be a print newspaper. Okay, now we've got video, we've got a streaming show, we've got opinion. Same way with influence, is that you've got to have a multifaceted strategy. I do think, without a doubt, talking to people in person is still very important, but that's only one part of the phase. Back then, that was the only phase.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you started at The Hill, is it safe to say it was more of a niche publication that was read by people on The Hill? And now, I mean, despite all of the challenges that we hear about and know about in journalism, more people access content from The Hill than ever before, I would guess.
That's right. Yeah, we used to be more of a niche publication, kind of putting insidery words like cloture in headlines. We don't do that anymore. Until 2009, we didn't have a White House correspondent. Now we have a White House team. We're called The Hill, but we used to just cover federal politics. Now we cover state politics because they're so intertwined and related to one another. So yeah, it's just been great to see kind of the Hill grow exponentially.
You talked about video, social media. I remember starting my career in the early 2000s, and the organization I worked for that was in education policy, we would print these reports and we'd have to go up to Capitol Hill and, drop them off at different members' offices. I mean, that was the distribution strategy. And, obviously it's changed a lot. But I mean, you remember that?
I do. I do. It was actually, I think it was my first or second week at the Hill. We had a distribution problem. So the staff, I was in like a suit and it was a hot day. We had to go up to Capitol Hill and deliver the print newspaper because, there's really no web, or the web wasn't nearly as big as it was
Yeah.
back then. So yeah, that was a trying day. Times have changed, thankfully. And of course, my colleagues were saying, oh, this happens once every other week. No, that was the only time we had to do that. But that was kind of an interesting thing. But you have to, not only do you have to produce the news, you got to get the news into their hands.
Yeah.
So that's what we did that day.
And now there's so much more competition because, it's not just the people who are willing, when there's a distribution problem, to slog up to the Hill in, 100-degree weather wearing a suit and drop these off. But of course, bloggers and influencers and foreign owned media sites can all get their information to Capitol Hill, to wherever they want, right away. And so can you talk a little bit about that, how the competitive environment has changed?
Yeah, it's a lot more competitive. Like when I came to the Hill, basically the two pure political newspapers were Roll Call and the Hill. And I remember an analyst in a story about the time, because the newspaper wars were heating up. That was the story between the Hill and Roll Call. And the heating up was we were going to, wow, twice a week in print, and they were going to 3 times a week. And one of the analysts said, there's no way both of these publications can survive. Well, that analyst, I still have that article, was quite wrong, because now we have basically, a dozen publications that really focus on politics first. So you have to be smart. When we get an idea, we've got to move quickly on it because we're smart, but there's a lot of smart competitors and rivals out there. So they're going to think of the same idea. So yeah, it's more saturated, partly because the demand has grown. The passion about politics, in some ways good, in some ways bad, has really increased, and that has increased demand. But now it is a crowded field of rivals.
How do you, as a journalistic organization, balance the need for speed to, break news, to get that out there faster with, obviously, you have to verify things, and not everybody who's posting on X, something, some breaking tip, they're not going through the same process. So, I mean, how has that changed over your time? What does that internal working look like to make sure that you're upholding the integrity of this, trusted brand that's been around for a long time, but also moving quicker than you had to move when you started?
Yeah, no, it's very important to be first, but at the same time, you have to make sure it's more important to be right. Now, like other news organizations, we will pre-write stories and have them ready to go, especially before an election, not only at the White House level, but at the House and Senate levels. So we're ready to go. That said, you have to make sure. We sometimes talk about. Well, obviously, we want as many sources as we can. Have we gone with a one-source story? Yes, but it's rare. We have to be really careful and trust that source tremendously. But obviously, the bottom line is, listen, we love to be first, but we have to be right. And that's why in this age of AI, people have to be very careful, too, because they think they see a story and it's not a story. It's obviously fake. And sometimes it's not so obvious. And that's what we have been telling our reporters for well over the last couple of years, honestly.
We've even seen that from elected officials in terms of them being fooled by a fake story. One that I saw several months ago was that there was a post on social media about the supposed death of a former president. It didn't happen, but it was a member of Congress or a senator, I forget exactly who reshared it with their condolences. So this is becoming a problem, not just for the public, but also even for our leaders, right?
No, that's right, and it's the same type of issue. Whether it's media or in PR, you've got to be careful. You got to make sure you get your facts straight, whether you're putting out a press release or commenting or sharing something. Is this the right thing? I mean, social media in some ways is so good, but it's also a weapon that can really turn on you. So you got to be careful with that stuff. And we've seen, as you said, some people have gotten fooled, but it's not that surprising because the technology that fools you is tremendous, and it's only getting better.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about some of the new things going on, but a moment ago, you were talking about just some of the tried and true, um, you know, kind of the philosophy of journalism, right? Of, confirming your sources and trusted information. So take us back. I'd love for you to tell us the story about how you got your start in journalism.
Yeah, well, I studied journalism at Loyola College, now university, and I was the co-captain of the tennis team. So half the semesters I had an excuse to not get an internship, and the other semesters I had no excuse and didn't do it. My professors told me to do internships. I did not do them. So when I graduated with a solid B average from Loyola, and it was a tough economic time, employers were not batting down my door. So it was taking me a couple years to get into journalism. I was kind of a tennis bum. I taught tennis for a little bit, tennis camps, summer things, and did some movie extra work on the side. But I decided, okay, I really want to get into journalism. So I decided that I wanted an interview with the new owner of the Baltimore Orioles. At that time, it was Peter Angelos. He was the big story of that time. And I had no connection to him. I didn't have a newspaper, so I called his office to interview him. And surprise, surprise, I didn't get a call back. Well, I ended up calling and calling and calling and ended up calling more than 50 times. I figured out when his assistant would leave and he would answer the phone like later at night. And eventually I got that interview because he knew I was very persistent. I wasn't obnoxious. I was very persistent, though. And I was not going to go away. And then he granted me the interview. Then I had to find a publication because I had no publication. And then I called around and got it placed for free in a small newspaper that still exists called the Baltimore Times. That helped me get into Inside Washington Publishers because even though I didn't have any experience, like with internships, I was able to say, hey, I'm persistent and I can get the story. And that helped me land my first job.
And you had a great clip. Even though
I did have a good clip.
Yes.
It wasn't the best written story in my career, but it worked.
Did you stay in touch with him at all?
I didn't, but I did. I did kind of. I did send him a note. Didn't hear back, but I said I thanked him. I think it was after I became editor-in-chief in 2014 of The Hill. I kind of relayed this story to him. Didn't hear back, but I wanted him to know and thank him because without that interview, maybe I wouldn't be where I am.
That is so cool. I love that story of persistence. Of course, we always tell young people, get that. You got to do the internship. You got to do the internship.
And of course.
It's good
advice. And that's definitely true. Do the internship.
But in your case, you didn't, and you really made up for it with the persistence of 50 phone calls and figuring out what time you would answer the phone. And I love that story about how you got your start. Now we know over that time, as we've been talking about, media organizations have changed. The media landscape has changed. But I want to talk a little bit about the media business. One of the big shifts I've seen in my career is that organizations that used to just write stories are now getting into other businesses. For example, they're creating event experiences where they're putting panels together and they're, sometimes they're live streams, sometimes they're building a really curated audience. And I know that's something that that you all do as well. So I wonder if you could talk about that. But in particular, I'm wondering, how has the role of editor-in-chief evolved as the media business has evolved its offerings? Because, it seems like there's some gray areas nowadays between the business side and with sponsorship and the editorial side. They used to be, I don't know, I mean, this is my take, but tell me what you think. I think it used to be a little bit more black and white, and now there's a little bit more of that gray area. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, the roles of editor-in-chiefs in many publications have changed. I moderate, as you mentioned, dozens of events every year. Moderate an event this week with a House member and a Senate member and experts on defense and vet issues. So it is a growing part of our business. And we try to break news, just like we try to break news in the newsroom at events. So we have policymakers we're usually talking about some specific policy, but at the same time, we're trying to break some news that people don't know. Now, as you mentioned, you still have to be careful because and ethically careful because you when we have events, most of them are sponsored, so it has to be if the sponsor is going to speak, it's got to be labeled as such, sponsor's perspective, and also at the same time, you've got to make sure that it's a balanced. So you have if it's a debate in healthcare, you've got two different people on a panel, and they may go at each other, but you got to have both of them and not just one of them. Just to have a one-sided view. So that's important. But honestly, it's I think it's a great thing for the influence business because if they sponsor an event, they go backstage, they talk to the members, glad handing, and then hopefully you put a spotlight on an issue that you want. But journalism companies do have to be careful. I've seen some of them go a little bit too much toward the sponsor, what the sponsor wants. You got to have those strong ethics. But without a doubt, that is a growing part of our business.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk about that, a little bit more. I'm just wondering, when you have events and you have policymakers speaking, now that anything can be captured as a video clip, are they more guarded than they used to be about what they are willing to say? Or I don't know, maybe they're less guarded because they know that, if they don't say something really interesting, nobody's going to pay attention to it in this noisy world. What have you seen in terms of the change from what they're willing to say publicly?
Well, it's a mixture, honestly. I've seen, I mean, just this week at our event, Congressman Mouton from Massachusetts, who ran for president, didn't go far. Most House members don't. But he revealed, and he had talked about it before, but he talked at length about he is a veteran and he had PTSD. And he thought when he acknowledged that he had been seeking therapy, that was going to be an end to his career. And what was the response? Quite the opposite. Everybody said, I really appreciate that you came out publicly for this. So I think some members, being more personal, and I think that we saw a presidential race where one candidate, Kamala Harris, was, I think, too cautious. She didn't really let her guard down. And I think sometimes when you let your guard down and you reveal personal things, it can work. But not all members are, or policymakers or administration officials are, they want to do that. So, but I think it's a mixture where some people see an opportunity to maybe get more followers, and members of Congress are also in that category as well. They like to have as many followers as we all do.
Yeah, that's kind of a new phenomenon, right? Is that,
Yes.
it used to be a member of Congress was going to go on TV or write an op-ed or whatever. And now they're trying to build their own followership. I saw that, there's been a couple of years now, AOC went on Twitch, which, for folks who don't know, is an Amazon-owned platform that people use to live stream playing video games. And, it was a way for her, but she's obviously built up a huge following across social media, and they're going out to these other platforms where they're trying to continue to build their following and reach new people. So what impact has that had, the fact that now policymakers are trying to build up a following on social media the way an influencer would?
Well, no, it's definitely a trend. There's no doubt about it. And I know that some members of Congress, when they send out tweets on X, I mean, they want to see how many times it's reposted and liked and all that kind of stuff. Now, you can argue from a governing perspective, maybe that's not the best. But how do you build clout? As an influencer, as a member of Congress, as a powerful person, you've got to have those components. You've got to, people want to hear what you have to say. And I do think AOC is very good at that. We've seen a number of members on both sides of the aisle who have grown their clout. And honestly, members do pay attention. And I've seen it where online, members are just getting lobbied, and it does. They notice it. They really do. As long as it's, fair and clean. But if it's very persistent, that's a good way to get your message across.
A trend that I've noticed, and I think, to me, where it really jumped out was Donald Trump's first administration, is this idea of going around the gatekeepers. It used to be you had to go give a statement to the media, or maybe you're on C-SPAN, but how many people are, watching that? It's not obviously going to be a top-rated network. But, you can go around the gatekeeper directly to the public. And I had this kind of maybe wake-up call around that when right after Donald Trump was elected the first time, Greenpeace took over a crane in downtown DC and hung a banner. It
I remember
happened to
that.
be right outside my office window. So we were in the office, the police shut the street down. Nobody knew what was happening until the banner was unfurled, and then, kind of figured it out. And they were live streaming on Facebook Live what they were doing from on top of the crane. And at the same time, Donald Trump was in the White House and he was live tweeting what was going on. And in both cases, they were going around the traditional media, going directly to hundreds of thousands or millions of people with their message. And we just talked about how, policymakers are building up their followership, like AOC, and Senator Ted Cruz from Texas is another example of doing that. He was sort of famously photographed looking at Twitter, searching for himself after a speech to see what people's reaction was to what he was saying. So how do you think that has changed the business of influence in Washington now that the policy world can go directly to the public and they don't have to go through a gatekeeper?
Yeah, no, times are changing. There's no doubt about it. And there are ways, as you say, whether it's Greenpeace doing a stunt or Trump going to McDonald's, that got a lot of play. That's free media. How do you get free media? That's the big question that I think that as people are trying to strategize to influence policymakers, how do you do it? You've got to do it in a creative way, in a way that's going to get attention. Like in the McDonald's Trump thing, the Democrats called that a stunt. Well, it worked. I mean, got a lot of attention on it, got a lot of free media, and didn't have to pay a dime. So, but you've got to come up with that creativity. Now, some of them, like Greenpeace situation, a little dangerous, but it did work, and we're talking about it. So, those are the things that you can't just do the run of the mill things. You've got to think what would be something smart right now that would get people to stop what they're doing, because we're all so busy, and pay attention to this, whatever this is.
Now, obviously, not every organization that wants to break through the noise can do a crazy stunt.
Right.
I wonder, you are paying attention to what's happening on Capitol Hill and what members of Congress, senators, and their staff, what's breaking through with them. You just have such a unique vantage point on that. I wonder what advice you have for advocates, people working for trade associations, people working for advocacy groups, the graduates of the Graduate School of Political Management at GW who are working in this influence economy. What advice do you have for folks like that who want to break through the noise and get their message to policymakers on Capitol Hill or potentially in the administration? What have you seen that is effective?
Well, I do think the even in this age of iPhones, is that personal connections make a big difference. When I came to the Hill, I covered healthcare, and one of the things I was covering at the time was Lou Gehrig's disease, and a devastating disease also called ALS. And basically, there was initiative to get people who have ALS onto Medicare so that they don't have these incredible costs. What was really effective was when ALS patients came up to Capitol Hill in wheelchairs to try to do. There was opposition to what they were trying to do because of cost reasons and other reasons. And guess what? That bill passed. So yeah, I do think when you're hearing when lawmakers hear those type of stories, whether it's in healthcare or a specific story about energy that they're going to remember that's really compelling, like here's a problem. Lawmakers come to Capitol Hill, most of them, and I really do believe this, they want to solve problems. So you've got to say, okay, here's the problem, and here's a real life person who's dealing with it. That really resonates. I know trade associations have lobbyists and they play important roles, but the reason why the patient or the normal person testifies on Capitol Hill is because that story is very compelling, more compelling than the lobbyist could actually tell. But the lobbyist needs to get the average person ready to testify or something like that, or go up to a member of Congress. That's very important. When you get, again, people to say, wow, this is a really compelling story, I need to do something about that. That's when things usually move on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and I love that example because a lot of organizations, they do fly-ins, they bring their people to the Hill, patients in this case that you mentioned with ALS, and now there's sort of this new layer to that. Okay, bringing 100 people to Washington, you could have done that 20 or 30 years ago, but you can now arm them with their own devices to take photos, take video clips, share that across multiple platforms, whether that's TikTok or X or, Instagram. And then more people back home across the country can see that. They can see that they're there. They can see what the members' reaction is. My gut is that that makes an impact, but I'd love to hear from you. Do you think that that makes a difference, that that can be amplified further now?
Yes, yes. And fly-ins, as you say, have been going on for many years, decades. They work because, again, you're making physical contact with either the staff or the member. But as you mentioned, with social media, now you can see, okay, you can say, well, our organization has a lot of reach, but you can prove it on social media because, as you mentioned, whether it's getting a photo, bringing it back home, maybe there's a local story. That's another thing to consider. The lawmakers and administration officials, they care about what's going on in Washington and what the Hill writes, but especially for members of Congress, what their local reporter is writing back home, where they have to get reelected. That's very important. So if they see, they love seeing photos of themselves all over the place. So if it's a fly-in a week ago and then they go home and it's in the paper and it's everywhere, they're like, wow, that shows I kind of got to pay attention to what this group is saying because they've got a lot of clout.
Yeah, 100%. So as we talk about, those hometown newspapers, a lot of them have closed. And,
Yeah.
when we look at the sort of share of attention of people, some of that attention is shifting to see what influencers have to say. And, they're telling people what the news is. And a lot of traditional media organizations are obviously really struggling. What's your take, having been in this business for 30 years, on the future of news? I mean, are you an optimist? Are you worried? What's your sort of take on where things are right now?
Um, I like to be an optimist, but we're in tough times. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This is one of the more difficult times for journalism and political journalism. As you say, local journalism has really been dying and been dying over the last 20 years. And there have been efforts to revive that, but it's not easy. Advertising across the board is down. I do think media organizations have to be nimble. They have to be constantly changing. I think the effect of legacy media is on the decline. I don't think there's any doubt about it. Where younger generations, they're getting their news on TikTok. And, it's one of those things where I ask our kids, who are three of them in college or grad school, how do they consume news? They don't consume news like I consume news growing up. They don't watch the, David Muir at night, even though I like David Muir. They're not watching that. So you've got to realize, and we do studies and analyze, okay, how old is our audience? It used to be quite older. And then through social media and an audience team strategy, we've made that younger. But without a doubt, I'm hoping that people still see the value of news that is unbiased. I mean, that's what we are. We're nonpartisan. We don't care who's up or who's down. There's a place for media that's left or right. But yeah, I think it's a trying time, and it remains to be seen where it's going. But I do think that there might be too many competitors in the field to support everybody in the advertising field. But we shall see. I try to be an optimist, but without a doubt, journalism has been going through a tough time, and that's going to continue in the immediate future.
Yeah. You mentioned, young people getting their news from TikTok. So does The Hill have a TikTok account?
Yes, and we have a whole social media team that we actually LinkedIn. We didn't use LinkedIn a lot for whatever reason, and then we started. Well, why aren't we doing that? We need to be really doing everything, and so whether it's events or announcements, we get more kind of play on some of these social media things than if we just put out a press release and nobody reads it. But if you put it on social media, people pay attention. That said, you've got to also get people's attention and make sure it's something that they want to read. Otherwise, they're not going to keep following you.
You talked about LinkedIn as a place that you post stories so that you can reach people. I'd love to kind of talk about that platform a little bit more. A lot of PR folks are wondering how they can get noticed by reporters. And I think in some ways it's harder than ever, just because for certain topics, there are fewer reporters than there used to be, so it's,
Right.
they're covering a lot of stuff. It's hard to get their attention. Should they, follow those reporters on on X and like their posts on that platform? Should they connect with them on LinkedIn? Are reporters using LinkedIn to find sources and verify somebody's expertise? I'd love to just hear your thoughts on how reporters today are using social media platforms, and how PR folks or people who want to expand their influence, through the media, can take those lessons and maybe apply them to the work that they're doing.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a great resource, and certainly I've seen our newsroom use it more to confirm, okay, who is this person, where do they work, and that kind of thing. It's also a medium that's quite friendlier than something like X, let's say. You don't see a
Yeah.
lot of insults on LinkedIn. So I do think it's very important as far as connecting with reporters. I would say it's less of liking their stuff on social media than reading their stuff.
Mhm.
Reading is underrated. Becoming familiar, if you want to connect with a reporter, okay, let's say you want to connect with an energy reporter at the Hill. Maybe you're in the energy field, and maybe you think you've got something to say, or you've got a lobbying campaign that you want to get us to write about. Okay, you got to figure out first who covers energy at the Hill. Then and it doesn't take that long. And you go on our site, you figure that out, and then you start to read what they've been writing about, and then you may see, oh, this writer actually has written about what I'm about to pitch. And instead of sending a blanket email to 100 reporters, um, maybe a specialized, hey, no, nobody's written about this, and I'm going to you first. Now,
Yeah.
it's still got to be good. It's still got to be interesting. That's what we want. I mean, the Hill. When people say, "Hey, what are you looking for in a story at the Hill?" It's kind of like a movie. No one says, "Let's go see a boring movie. Let's go read a boring article." We want to be interesting. But that's better to be to contact with a reporter. It's also flattering to say, "Hey, I just read your story last week on this.
Mhm.
Thought it was really good. Compliments always work." And there could be another follow up here, or here's a related story. A lot of PR people don't do that simple homework. And also, when you make the pitch, one of the worst pitches that I've ever seen is when you send an email out and it doesn't have any compelling reason to open it. We
Yeah.
all get a million emails, and reporters get more than most, right? We get a lot of press releases. I only open about 10%
Hmm.
of my emails. So one example I always say is I got pitched, or somebody was sending out an email, and what did the inbox subject line say? It said press release. And just for fun, I said, oh my God, this is the worst press release ever. I don't even know what it is. I'm actually going to open it just to see what it is. And so I opened it, and then what was the press release? Well, it was a PDF file. So then I had to open that up. I didn't open that up. Then I'm like, but you have to grab people's attention, including
Yeah.
reporters, and say, hey, we got a big story on this. Just like we have to grab people's attention with a lead and a headline.
Yeah.
That's what PR people need to do.
And I think it's important to remember, it wasn't that long ago that it was hard to find out like who is the person who covers this. You had to like pay for access to these
Right.
directories, and they were printed not that long ago, and you're flipping through hoping it's up to date.
Right.
Now, to your point, it is so easy to do an internet search or to look on LinkedIn to figure out who's the energy reporter at the Hill, and then to take the time to read the amount of time it took you to flip through those old pages. Now you can have read one or two of their stories so that you can customize that pitch. But because technology has allowed us to send mass messages, it has, for some reason, enabled people to sort of skip that etiquette, and they're just sending you press release with press release and the subject, and obviously that's not breaking through. So
Exactly.
don't take my word for it. Take Bob's word for it
You
on
have to
that,
be
editor of the
creative
Hill.
in your pitches. You can't
you
just do what everybody else is doing.
you mentioned, we can't be boring, whether you're a journalist writing a story or whether you're, pitching a journalist. One of the things that's so cool about your story, Bob, and your background is that you've written 2 award-winning screenplays. You got your start acting as a kid. Your parents were in that world, and I wonder if you could just share any of the other lessons, because that was kind of one already, that you have learned from the world of entertainment that can help policy communicators break through with the stories that they want to tell.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I did grow up in New York City, and my parents had real jobs, but on Thursday through Sunday, they would put on plays, children's plays, Agatha Christie dramas, and I would be part of that. I would be either doing the lights or acting or whatever. And it was way off Broadway. There's only 100 people max that would see these things, but it was an interesting way to grow up. And then I was in a Pampers commercial, so that got me in the Screen Actors Guild. And it took me, so then basically once you're in Screen Actors Guild, then you can continue to be in Screen Actors Guild as long as you pay the dues. And then that's how you get potentially larger roles. And so
Wait, so how old
that
were
was
you
a
when
lot.
you were in that commercial?
How old was I?
Yeah.
Oh, probably 6 months. And my friends want to see a video of that. It doesn't exist. And if it did, they throw it up on YouTube right away.
But you've
But
been in the Screen Actors Guild longer than you can remember. I didn't realize how long
yeah,
it was. That's cool.
exactly right. But it has helped me because in politics, I don't think I was the greatest actor in the world. But you know, in politics, people are playing a role. Like sometimes politicians have to say things that maybe they don't quite believe in because, well, they're getting pushed by the leader of their party, or they have to do it for. So they're playing a role. They're kind of acting in a way, and it's also helped me do, I think, for TV appearances, just being comfortable in front of people. It's a totally different thing, but it is related to being comfortable being in front of a camera or a lot of people. And I think that growing up really helped me.
This has been a character, this whole interview. Bob's. No. I think that I like what you said earlier about nobody wants to see a boring movie, right? You have to
Yeah.
make it interesting. And that's a really important thing for folks to remember, whether they're pitching a story, or whether, again, it's a journalist writing a headline. Say a little bit more about that, because it's easy to say, of course, you got to make things interesting, but it's much harder to put that into practice. How do you help your team remember that?
Well, it's interesting. Like the way we operate is that the onus is on reporters to come to editors with stories. Then, of course, editors find out about stories and they hand them out. But you've got to come something to the table, like every day. Okay, what are you working on? Right? They send it in, and then we, as the editors, have a morning meeting and discuss. Okay, is this good? Now, sometimes it's really kind of a narrow niche thing, and that's where we're like, hey, we got to broaden this out, and that's what we've done at the Hill, where we were talking earlier about becoming we were a niche publication, which we were. Then we went national, and so about 10 years ago, I've been at the Hill more than 20 years, but it was really about 10 years ago when my friends and family started posting our stuff on social media. They didn't do it before. They knew I worked at the Hill, and I think the reason is because we were writing more digestible stories. Congress, Washington, very complicated. You've got to boil it down, not dumb it down, but make it digestible. And if you're writing an insidery story that's just for insiders, well, then you're going to have, a very small group of eyeballs. The political junkies didn't leave us when we went national. We give them what they want, but we're appealing, to people like my wife, who is interested in politics, but you're never going to see her watching C-SPAN. That's we want to appeal to the people who are interested, who have real lives across the country, and our audience has grown. Some people think we just have a Washington audience. Our Washington audience is a fraction of what is across the country. So that's, I think, how we've grown, because it's got to be interesting and also broad. So people are like, this is a big story. Not every story can be that, but when you have the opportunity, don't minimize it, maximize it.
I like to think of the Hill as, you're read by Washington insiders. So folks around the country and the world who want to read what the Washington insiders are reading, they're the ones that are going to pay attention to the Hill, compared to maybe some other folks. And I think that's really a unique differentiator. Folks trust you. They trust you as a, nonpartisan source of information covering, things which obviously our media landscape, we have many more partisan leaning media than maybe we used to. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about trust and how you build trust with your audience, how you maintain trust with your audience, particularly in such a fragmented media landscape.
Yeah, it's a good question, because trust is everything. You've got to have trust in your relationships in life, whether it's a friend or spouse, or And you got to have trust in media because, going back to the movie analogy, if you get recommended, if someone says,
Hmm.
"Hey, this is a good movie," well, what's the source? Oh, it's my crazy uncle who likes everything, but it's probably a terrible movie. So you've got to say, it's like, okay, what's the news? But also, where am I getting it from? And
Yeah.
you can't do that overnight, and that's why building the Hills brand has taken a long time. Like, we've seen other newspapers try to get into the game, political newspapers, and into this saturated politics space, and it hasn't worked, maybe for a variety of reasons, because of the economy and it's a crowded field, but also because you can't build a brand overnight. It's got to
Hmm.
be done over years. People have to realize, a lot of people come to just type in thehill.com. They just want to see what's going on. That's rare
Mhm.
nowadays, and that's because they trust our stuff. We're not perfect, we're just like anybody else. We make mistakes, and when we do, we have to admit it. But that also builds trust when you say, "Yeah, no, this is right, and this wasn't right, and that's why we need to correct it."
Someone once told me trust is kind of like a balloon. I mean, it takes some time and effort to fill it up. But
Yes,
one little prick with a pin, and that balloon pops, and the trust is gone. And I think for an
exactly.
organization that folks have trusted for so long, to your point, it's really hard for someone else to come in and displace that. At the same time, we have seen these political influencers build audiences so quickly. NATO did something really interesting this year. They hired influencers to help promote the NATO summit in DC. And of course, in the recent presidential election, both campaigns courted influencers and worked with influencers. Um, when you look at that, I mean, is an organization like The Hill, are you saying, gosh, I got to make some of my reporters into influencers? I have to have faces, not just my brand? Or how do you think about that when you see these influencers out there, and kind of how you have to, you do have to compete against them for share of voice if you're on TikTok?
No, that's right, and a lot of those influencer, they have the ability to kind of push the envelope. Our
Mhm.
reporters are in a different space. We do want them out there. We want them on, at the Hill. We're owned by Nexstar, which has News Nation, but we are on Fox. We're on CNN. We want our reporters everywhere, including on News Nation. But at the same time, they have to do it in a certain way. Obviously we don't want our reporters, can't have our reporters going out expressing their opinions. They're not columnists, they're reporters. So you can have analysis, interesting analysis, but that's different than opinion. But we do want our people to have a brand, but also be mindful of the Hills brand, and that has to be consistent. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. Okay, last thing I want to ask you before we go. So many people may have seen you on cable news, but there's somewhere else that many people, including your friends, have seen you, which is on an episode of the HBO show Veep. You got to tell us a little bit about that, and just, they say, life imitates art sometimes. I mean, is Veep the most accurate depiction of Washington and Hollywood when we compare it to, House of Cards and these others? What's your take?
Oh, definitely, definitely. It's and I like the first few seasons of House of Cards, but Veep certainly beats it. Yeah, it was just an interesting situation because as I got a real job in journalism and became editor of The Hill, I would tell the agents, I mean, listen, I'm not going to do extra work. Maybe I'll do that when I'm retired anymore because I've done a fair amount of that in the past. But with my day job, but I also said, listen, if there's a speaking role, let me know. Now, for speaking roles, you have to try out. So I did try out, and the odds are against you. I landed this role to be a lobbyist, a pro-life lobbyist, and it's in season 3 of Veep. And it was just a very cool experience because I'm on the set, and there's copies of The Hill and Politico as real props on the set. And interestingly, this was a while back. But during the shooting, there was a government shutdown fight going on. So I'm on the set of the cast, and I, just meeting the cast, Matt Walsh, who is great in the show, and I had a one-on-one scene with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. Unfortunately, that got cut, but my character did not got cut. I did end up in the show, but they were asking me about this government shutdown fight. So you have these, fictional characters asking about real politics that's going on. It was actually one of the most enjoyable experiences of my life, and But you never know until you see it. You still may end up on the cutting room floor. But looking at the script, I'm like, because basically the concept is we're trying to get in to meet with the Veep, both me and a pro-choice lobbyist. So it's a battle between the two of us, and spoiler alert, I win, and I get the meeting with her. But unfortunately, as I said, they cut that meeting. But I had a high five with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. It was kind of cool.
That's great. I mean, did you say, "Hey, I could be a consultant for your future episodes"?
My phone, I would answer that call. Let me tell you.
Well, as we wrap up, what advice would you want to leave folks with as they're grappling with this changing media landscape, building trust? A lot of our audience, they're thinking about what it means to influence and inspire in today's environment. So I'd just love to know anything you'd like to leave us with today.
Yeah, I think persistence is key. You have to be persistent in this industry and professional, and remember that your reputation is the most valuable thing that you have, especially in Washington, D.C. And I've seen people who've gotten into controversies, but have, treated people nicely. And then I've seen people who've gotten into controversies who've not treated people nicely, and they don't survive those controversies. So I do think that as far as persistence is good, making contacts, having a coffee, setting up a coffee. We do that with members of Congress off the record. We just say, hey, we just want to talk to you off the record. And sometimes they say, well, we can't do it this week. Okay, well, how about next week or next month? Anytime, just set it up. And usually they're flattered by that. And reporters are flattered by that too. And anytime you and I even tell aspiring journalists to interview journalists to say, how did you succeed? People love talking about themselves. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, that's great advice. And obviously, persistence was key for you because you didn't do that internship in college since you were busy with tennis, but you used persistence to land that interview with the new owner at the time of the Baltimore Orioles. Got that place, didn't get paid for it, but that clip landed you your first job in journalism. And now you've been in the field for 30 years. You've risen to the rank of editor-in-chief, and you've seen so much, Bob, over that period of time. The media business has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. And the importance of trust, the importance of persistence, as you said, and the importance of showing up in person. And we talked about whether that's having coffee with a member of Congress or a reporter, or bringing your patient advocates up to Capitol Hill and seeing the success in passing that bill because they were inspired by the story. So such great lessons, Bob Cusack. Thank you so much for spending time with us today on Chief Influencer. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed the discussion. I loved it.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a Chief Influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.